when my husband casually remarked, "My buddies say you're not impressive enough for me, that I could easily do better." I calmly replied, "Then go look for something better." That very same day, I quietly cancelled our plans, the gifts, absolutely everything. 2 weeks later, at 4 a.m. His closest friend called me sobbing. "Please answer the phone. Something happened tonight. And it involves you." "Okay, gather round, because I need to tell you a story that still gives me chills." Can you imagine waking up one morning to find the person you've spent 7 years building a life with, the man you married, packing a suitcase, because he thinks you're unremarkable? What if he had absolutely no idea that you were secretly a multimillionaire, and had been funding his entire successful image all along? It was 6:15 a.m. I woke up, still groggy, to the sound of my husband, Emmett, meticulously folding shirts. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. He didn't even look at me. Just kept folding, his movements aggressive, almost angry. "I'm going to Marcus's place for a few days," he said, his voice flat. "I need space to think about our relationship, about whether this is really what I want." I sat up, a cold dread creeping in. "Whether what is what you want?" I gestured vaguely at our bedroom, at me, at the 7 years of marriage contained in every framed photo and piece of furniture. "This? Us?" He finally looked at me, a strange mix of pity and dismissal in his eyes. "You're a great person, Cora, but my friends have been asking questions about why I'm with someone who doesn't really have ambition. Someone who's just comfortable. Not impressive." That word, impressive, it landed like a physical slap. My heart seized. "Sienna said something last night that really stuck with me," he continued, oblivious to the hurt blooming on my face. "She said I was too remarkable to be with someone unremarkable. And I think she's right." He snapped the suitcase shut. "So, I'm going to take some time. Figure out if I want to stay in this marriage or if I want to find someone more aligned with where my life is going." He turned, suitcase in hand, heading for the door. "Emmett," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. He paused, probably expecting tears, expecting me to beg. But I didn't. Instead, a quiet, furious resolve settled over me. "Before you go," I continued, my voice steady, "I need to tell you something about my work. About what I've actually been doing for the last 3 years, while you thought I was just comfortable and unremarkable." He sighed, annoyed, and set the suitcase down. "Cora, this really isn't the time. My company was just acquired for $21 million, I stated calmly, watching his face. "My share is $12.7 million. The information hit him like a freight train, slamming into his carefully constructed narrative. I could see his brain scrambling, trying to reconcile the numbers with the woman he thought he knew. "So, yes," I said, a dangerous calm in my voice. "Take your time at Marcus's place. Think about whether you want to find someone more impressive. And while you're doing that, I'll be planning something special for your birthday. Don't worry, you and all your friends are invited." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The sound of silence after that was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in 7 years. "Oh, and Emmett?" I added, almost an afterthought. "The apartment lease is in my name. So take all the time you need, just not here." He stood frozen in the doorway, suitcase handle gripped, his brain visibly short-circuiting. $12.70 million. Company acquisition, 3 years. He was trying to piece it together, trying to make sense of the woman he'd so easily dismissed. "You're lying," he finally choked out, his voice flat, defensive. "You don't have a company. You do freelance consulting from the apartment." I reached for my phone, pulled up my email, and turned the screen toward him. "This is from Catalyst Ventures. The acquisition closed yesterday. Would you like to read the wire transfer confirmation?" He didn't move. Didn't even reach for the phone. He just stared at me like I'd started speaking a language he didn't understand. "My business partner's name is Maya Chen. We started the firm 3 years ago. Right around the time you got that promotion you were so proud of. Remember when you came home talking about your new title, your raise, how you'd finally made it? I set the phone back down. I was happy for you. I made your favorite dinner. I listened to you talk about your success for 2 hours. I never mentioned that I just signed my first 7-figure client. Why? The word came out strangled, raw. Why wouldn't you tell me? I thought about that, I said, really letting the answer form in my mind. Because you were so proud of being the successful one. The breadwinner. The remarkable husband with the supportive wife. And I actually thought that letting you have that narrative was what a good wife did. That making myself smaller so you could feel bigger was love. I got out of bed, walked past him to the closet, and started pulling out clothes for the day. A simple black dress, professional, the kind I wore to client meetings when I needed to project authority. I supported you for 2 years after you finished grad school. I continued, keeping my voice level. While you were interning at firms that paid nothing. I paid our rent. I paid our bills. I never mentioned it because I thought that's what partners did. Emmett was still standing in the doorway, pale now, the suitcase forgotten in his hand. Last year, when your firm restructured and cut your salary, I covered the shortfall. You were embarrassed, so I didn't make a big deal about it. Just quietly transferred money from my business account to our joint account so you wouldn't have to worry. I pulled the dress off its hanger. The Tesla you've been test driving every weekend? I made a down payment last week. $20,000. Surprise. His eyes widened. Cora, the apartment we live in, the lease is in my name. Has been since before we got married. You moved in with me, not the other way around. The furniture, the art on the walls, the car you drive. I bought all of it. Not because I was keeping score, but because I thought we were building a life together. I thought we were partners. His face had gone from pale to an ashen gray. I didn't know. No, you didn't, I said, the words sharper than I'd intended, years of suppressed frustration finally finding their edge. Because you never asked? In 7 years of marriage, you never once asked me what I was really working on, what I cared about, what I was building. You just assumed I was there to support your career, your dreams, your ambitions. The unremarkable wife with the remarkable husband. I walked past him into the bathroom, started brushing my teeth. Through the mirror, I could see him still standing there, processing, trying to find his footing in a conversation that had completely escaped his control. I met you 9 years ago, I said around the toothbrush. At that coffee shop in Portland. You were a grad student with big dreams about changing the world through architecture. You had this way of talking about buildings like they were living things. And I fell hard. I rinsed, set down the toothbrush. We got married at my parents' vineyard in Napa. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. I wore my grandmother's dress. You cried during your vows. You promised to see me, really see me, for the rest of our lives. The memories hung between us, thick and tangible. For the first few years, I thought you did see me. I thought we were happy. I worked my freelance consulting jobs, contributed to bills, supported your career, made your favorite meals, went to your work events, smiled at your colleagues, listened to you talk about your projects for hours. I met his eyes in the mirror. I was very good at being the woman in the background. The steady presence that required no attention. I thought that's what you wanted. Emmett said quietly. You never said you wanted more. I shouldn't have had to say it, I said, turning to face him directly. You should have asked. In 7 years, you should have wondered at least once if there was more to me than what you could see on the surface. He finally sat down the suitcase, ran his hands through his hair. I don't understand. You had all this success, this company, this money. Why did you hide it? Why did you let me think that I was unremarkable? Because I thought you needed to be the successful one. I finished for him. I thought that's what you wanted. And maybe. I paused, surprised by the realization even as I said it out loud. Maybe I was testing you. Seeing if you'd love me when you thought I was ordinary. When there was nothing impressive about me to reflect well on you. The test results were in. He'd failed spectacularly. You said Sienna told you I was unremarkable. I said. When was that conversation? He looked uncomfortable. Last night at dinner. A bunch of us went out after work. Marcus, Devin, Harper, Sienna. We were talking about relationships, careers, life stuff. And Sienna, she didn't mean it in a bad way. She just said she thought I could probably do better, that I was too accomplished to be with someone who didn't have the same level of ambition. And you agreed with her? It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. I thought she had a point. I nodded slowly. So this morning you woke up and decided to pack a bag, to go to Marcus's place, and think about whether you wanted to stay married to your unremarkable wife. Is that about right? When you say it like that. How should I say it, Emmett? I walked back into the bedroom, started making the bed. You were leaving me. Not with conversation or honesty or any attempt to work through whatever you were feeling. You were just packing a suitcase and walking out at 6 in the morning so you could avoid the mess of an actual breakup. He winced. I was going to call you later. Explain everything properly. How generous. I smoothed the comforter, fluffed the pillows. Well, you don't have to call now. You can explain everything properly right here. Tell me exactly what made you think I was unremarkable. I'm genuinely curious. Emmett shifted his weight, deeply uncomfortable now. It's not that you're unremarkable. It's just, you don't have ambitions. You work from home. You don't have a title or a career path or a 7-figure income. He trailed off. Or a multi-million-dollar company, or clients in 6 countries, or acquisition offers from 2 Fortune 500 companies. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Which part of that sounds unambitious to you? I didn't know about any of that because you never asked. I repeated it, letting it sink in. 7 years, Emmett. You never asked? The morning light was starting to filter through the blinds, casting stripes across the bedroom floor. Somewhere outside, I could hear traffic building, the city waking up. People starting their ordinary days with their ordinary problems. My problem was no longer ordinary. I want you to go to Marcus's place, I said finally. I want you to take your time thinking about whether I'm remarkable enough for you. And while you're doing that, I'm going to be doing something too. What? Planning your birthday party. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. You said your friends are all invited, right? Marcus, Devin, Harper, Sienna, the ones who think I'm so unremarkable. He nodded slowly, wary now. Good. Because I already have a reservation at Atelier Rousseau for your birthday. I made it 4 months ago. Michelin-starred restaurant, 3-month waitlist, the works. I was going to surprise you with a private dinner, just the 2 of us. I stood up, walked to my closet, started getting dressed. But I think I'm going to modify the reservation. Make it a group event. Something memorable. Cora, what are you planning? I pulled the black dress over my head, zipped it up. I'm planning to give you and your friends exactly what you want. The truth about who I really am. No more hiding. No more being unremarkable. I grabbed my laptop bag from the desk, my car keys from the dresser. The apartment lease is in my name, like I said. So, take your suitcase and go to Marcus's place. Take a week. Take 2 weeks. Take however long you need to decide if you want to find someone more impressive than me. I walked to the bedroom door, then paused and looked back at him. But Emmett, don't miss your birthday dinner. I promise, it's going to be unforgettable. I drove to Maya's apartment in the Mission District, arriving just after 7:30. She lived on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian, the kind of place with original hardwood floors and bay windows that caught the morning light. I'd barely knocked when she opened the door, already dressed, coffee already made. Tell me everything, she said, pulling me inside. I collapsed onto her couch and recounted it all, the suitcase, the speech about being unremarkable, the way he looked at me when I told him about the acquisition, the invitation to his birthday dinner that was going to become something else entirely. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something that looked almost like vindication. When I finished, she poured us both coffee and sat down across from me. 3 years? She said quietly. 3 years you've been hiding what we built because you were afraid of how he'd react. I wasn't afraid. Yes, you were. You were terrified he'd feel diminished, that he'd be threatened, that he wouldn't be able to handle having a wife who was more successful than him. She set down her cup. And guess what? You were right. The second his friends questioned whether you were remarkable enough, he started packing a suitcase. The words stung because they were true. Maya and I had met in college freshman year, randomly assigned as roommates in a dorm that smelled like old carpet and ambition. She was studying computer science. I was studying business management. We'd stayed up late talking about the companies we'd build someday, the impact we'd make, the way we'd change industries that desperately needed changing. After graduation, we'd gone separate ways for a few years. She'd worked at a tech startup in Austin. I'd done consulting for various firms in San Francisco. But we'd stayed close, talking every week, sharing ideas, watching each other's careers develop. Then, 3 years ago, over drinks at a wine bar in North Beach, Maya had pitched me an idea. Crisis management for tech companies, she'd said. But not the corporate BS kind, the real kind. When a company has a data breach and millions of customer records get exposed. When an executive gets caught doing something awful and the board needs damage control. When everything is on fire and the traditional PR firms are too scared to touch it. I'd been intrigued immediately. Why us? Because we're good at putting out fires. Because we understand tech. And because no one expects two women to walk into a room and fix what their overpaid consultants couldn't. She'd grinned. Also, we'd make a fortune. She hadn't been wrong. We'd started small. Maya handled the technical side, understanding the systems, the breaches, the vulnerabilities. I handled the people side, the executives, the boards, the carefully crafted statements that acknowledged problems without creating legal liability. Our first client had been a mid-sized fintech company that had exposed 3 million users' financial data through a coding error. They'd hired us out of desperation after 2 other firms had turned them down. We'd fixed it in 6 weeks, contained the PR damage, implemented new security protocols, turned a catastrophe into a case study in responsible crisis response. Word spread fast in the insular world of tech executives. By the end of year 1, we'd billed $800,000. By the end of year 2, $2.3 million. Last year, $4.2 million. We were expensive. We were discreet. And we were devastatingly effective at saving reputations and careers when everything was falling apart. 6 months ago, 2 Fortune 500 companies had approached us about acquisition. They wanted our methods, our client list, our expertise, but most of all, they wanted us. The offers had been staggering. The kind of numbers that made my accountant develop a nervous tic when he showed me the projections. But both offers came with the same condition: we had to go public. Our LLC structure had kept our names hidden, offering anonymity to clients who valued discretion above everything else. But if we wanted 8-figure payouts, we needed to become the public faces of what we'd built. I'd hesitated for months. I told Maya I needed more time, that I wasn't ready, that going public would complicate things at home. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. I was afraid of how Emmett would react. I should have told him years ago. I said now, staring into my coffee. When we first started making real money, when we landed our first 7-figure client, I should have just been honest. Why weren't you? Maya asked gently. I thought about that. Really thought about it. Because he was so proud of being the successful one. The breadwinner. Every time we went to a party or a work event, he'd introduce me as his wife who does some freelance consulting. And then he'd spend 20 minutes talking about his latest architectural project. And I'd stand there smiling, nodding, playing the supportive wife. I set down my cup. I told myself I was being kind, letting him have the spotlight, not making it a competition. But it wasn't kindness. It was enabling. Maya finished. I know that now. She pulled out her laptop, opened it on the coffee table between us. Hey, so here's where we are. Catalyst Ventures is ready to close the deal. $21 million for 60% of the company. Your share, after splitting, $12.7 million. Mine the same. We stay on as executive partners. Full control of operations. 5-year commitment. The numbers still didn't feel real. The press release is drafted. Maya continued. Jordan McNulty is handling PR. He's coordinated with TechCrunch, Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, all the major business outlets. The story goes live the night of Emmett's birthday. Ashfordshire Crisis Management acquired by Catalyst Ventures. 2 women built an 8-figure company while everyone was looking the other way. She glanced up at me. That's the angle Jordan wants to lead with. The invisible founders, the women who built something extraordinary while staying completely under the radar. It's a good story, Cora. People are going to eat it up. I thought about Emmett seeing that story. About Marcus and Devin and Sienna and Harper. All the friends who decided I wasn't remarkable enough. Scrolling through their feeds and seeing my face beside Maya's. Seeing the numbers, seeing the truth they'd been too lazy or too dismissive to discover on their own. When's the board meeting? I asked. Friday. 3 days from now. The investors want to finalize terms, sign papers, make it official. Maya closed her laptop. Are you ready for this? Really ready? Because once we do this, there's no going back to invisible. We're the face of the company. Every success, every failure, every decision. It's public now. I'm ready, I said. And I meant it. That afternoon, I went home and pulled out every piece of documentation I'd been maintaining for the past 3 years. Partnership agreements with Maya, client contracts with NDAs and confidentiality clauses, bank statements showing wire transfers and quarterly earnings, tax returns that told a story Emmett had never bothered to read. I'd been supporting us financially for the last 18 months, ever since his architecture firm had gone through restructuring and cut his salary by 30%. He'd been embarrassed, angry at himself, worried about money. I'd quietly transferred funds from my business account to our joint account, covering the difference so seamlessly he'd never noticed. The apartment we lived in? My name was the only one on the lease. I'd bought it 5 years ago, before we were married, back when I was still freelancing and saving aggressively. Emmett had moved in after the wedding. We never bothered changing the paperwork. The furniture, the art on the walls, the expensive coffee maker he used every morning, I'd bought all of it. Not because I was keeping score, but because I'd had the money and he'd had student loans he was still paying down. The car he drove, the laptop he used for work, the tailored suits that photographed well at client meetings, all of it funded by the unremarkable wife doing her freelance consulting from home. I made copies of everything, organized it chronologically, created a simple presentation with clean slides and undeniable numbers. Then I pulled up the folder I'd labeled Support. 2 years ago, when Emmett had graduated and started looking for work. 2 years of rent payments while he interned at firms that paid nothing but promised experience. The $15,000 I'd loaned him for professional camera equipment, high-end gear for architectural photography that would make his portfolio stand out. He'd promised to pay me back when he got his first real paycheck. That was 4 years ago. We never discussed it again. The $8,000 website redesigned by a professional developer who'd made Emmett's online portfolio look slick and sophisticated. The $3,000 I'd spent on his membership to the American Institute of Architects. The countless dinners and client lunches I'd funded while he was networking and building connections. I'd never thought of it as keeping score. I'd thought of it as partnership, as investment in our shared future, as the invisible work that held relationships and households together. But looking at the numbers now, spread across my desk in neat columns of debits and credits, I realized I'd been subsidizing more than his career. I'd been subsidizing his ego. Funding the fiction that he was the successful one, the remarkable one, the generous husband who'd been kind enough to marry someone ordinary. My phone buzzed. A text from Emmett. Can we talk? I've been thinking about what you said. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, not yet. Enjoy your time at Marcus's place. We'll talk at your birthday dinner. Another buzz, almost immediate. About that, maybe we should cancel the dinner? Keep this between us. I smiled at the screen. He was starting to understand that something was coming. Starting to feel the first tremors of the earthquake I was about to trigger. No, I typed back. Your friends were instrumental in helping you see how unremarkable I am. They deserve to be there when you find someone better. Dinner is still on. Saturday 8 p.m. Atelier Rousseau. Don't be late. I silenced my phone and went back to my documentation. 3 days until the board meeting. 10 days until Emmett's birthday. 10 days until everyone who'd ever called me unremarkable learned exactly what they'd been too blind to see. I pulled up the reservation for Atelier Rousseau on my laptop and clicked the modification button. Changed the party size from 2 to 12. Added a note requesting the semi-private dining room with presentation capabilities. Then I called the restaurant directly. This is Cora Ashford. I have a reservation for the 15th. I'd like to make some special arrangements. The maitre d' at Atelier Rousseau was a woman named Colette. French accent still thick despite 20 years in San Francisco. She listened to my requests with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen everything. The semi-private dining room? Yes, we have availability for your date. And you'd like presentation equipment, a screen and connection for my laptop? Nothing elaborate, just clean and professional. Of course. And the menu, the chef's tasting menu, all 12 guests, wine pairings. I paused. And Colette, I need absolute discretion. The guest of honor doesn't know about the modifications I'm making. Something flickered in her expression. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition of a story she'd heard variations of before. Naturally, Miss Ashford, we pride ourselves on discretion. I hung up, and immediately my phone buzzed with a text from Emmett. His first of what would become many. This is crazy. Can we please just talk? I set the phone face down on my desk and went back to work. Over the next 3 days, the messages came in waves. 19 texts, each one revealing exactly how little he understood about what had broken between us. Day 1 was anger. You're being completely irrational about this. I was just being honest. That's what we're supposed to do in a marriage. Day 2 shifted to confusion. I don't understand why you're shutting me out. Can we at least talk like adults? This silent treatment is childish. By day 3, he'd moved to conciliation. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Work has been intense and my friends were just trying to help me process. Can we please just sit down and talk this through? I responded to exactly 0 messages. In my crisis management work, I'd learned that silence was often more devastating than confrontation. When companies faced scandals, the worst thing they could do was engage in back and forth with critics. It gave the story oxygen, kept it alive, allowed the narrative to spiral in unpredictable directions. Better to go quiet. Let the other side fill the vacuum with their own fears and projections. Let them imagine the worst possible scenarios. I could feel Emmett starting to panic by day 5. Please just tell me what I can do to fix this. I know I messed up. I know I said something hurtful, but we've been together 7 years. That has to count for something. Please. Day 6, Marcus says I should give you space, but I can't just sit here not knowing what you're thinking. Are you planning to leave me? Are you talking to a lawyer? Please just tell me what's happening. The mention of a lawyer was interesting. He was starting to understand. This wasn't a fight. This was something else. Day 7, I drove by the apartment today. Your car was there, but you didn't answer when I knocked. I know you're home. I know you can hear me. This isn't fair, Cora. You can't just shut me out like this. Surely I could. The apartment was mine. The lease was in my name. He had no legal right to be there, and I'd already changed the locks. A precaution Helen Voss had recommended during our first meeting. I'd met Helen on day 4, in her glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of a building in the financial district. Maya had recommended her with 7 words. She protects women's assets. She's ruthless. Helen was in her 60s, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had the kind of face that had seen every variation of human betrayal, and wasn't impressed by any of it anymore. I'd brought copies of everything: the apartment lease, bank statements, tax returns, the paper trail of financial support I'd provided throughout our marriage. Helen spread the documents across her massive desk and studied them with the focus of a surgeon examining X-rays. "This is unusual," she said after several minutes of silence. "Usually I'm helping women prove their non-financial contributions. Childcare, household management, emotional labor. Trying to argue that those things have value, even if they don't show up in a bank account." She looked up at me. "You're in the opposite position. You've been the breadwinner, and he doesn't even know it." "He knows now," I said. "I told him the morning he was leaving." "How did he react?" "Shock, disbelief. He accused me of lying at first." Helen nodded, unsurprised. "They usually do. Men like your husband build their identity around being providers. When that narrative collapses, they don't handle it well." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "California is a community property state. Anything acquired during the marriage is presumed to be jointly owned. But there are exceptions." She walked me through the specifics. "The apartment was mine, acquired before marriage. Lease never changed. That was separate property. My business was trickier. Maya and I had started it during my marriage, which meant Emmett could potentially claim a portion of its value." "But," Helen said, tapping her pen against the pad, "if you can demonstrate that you built the business with your own labor and capital, and that he made no contributions to its success, you have a strong argument for keeping it separate. Do you have documentation of how you funded the startup costs?" "Everything came from my personal savings from before we were married." "Good. And did he ever contribute financially to the business? Invest money, provide loans?" "No. He didn't even know it existed until 4 days ago." Helen allowed herself a small smile. "Even better. What about his career? Did you support him financially while he was building his?" I told her about the 2 years of rent payments, the equipment loan, the website design, the professional memberships and networking events. "Document all of it," Helen said. "Dates, amounts, any written communication about repayment. In California, when one spouse supports the other's education or career development, that can be considered a separate contribution that offsets community property claims." She drew up preliminary separation papers, advised me on asset protection, explained how to separate our bank accounts without triggering suspicion. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Helen asked as I was leaving. 7 years is a long time. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed or influenced by friends. Sometimes marriage counseling can. 7 years of being invisible is long enough, I said. Helen studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll have the papers ready by early next week. But Miss Ashford, once you file, there's no putting this back in the box. Make sure this is really what you want." I thought about Emmett's suitcase, about the casual cruelty of being called unremarkable. About 7 years of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. "It's what I want," I said. On day 8, I met with Jordan McNulty at a cafe in the Mission. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and 2 coffees waiting. Jordan was in his early 40s, perpetually dressed like he'd just come from a meeting with important people, which he usually had. He'd built his career managing product launches for tech companies, the kind of careful narrative construction that turns software releases into cultural moments. "You're finally doing it," he said when I sat down. "Going public with what you've built." I explained the situation, the marriage ending, the acquisition closing in less than 2 weeks, the birthday dinner I was planning for Emmett and his friends. Jordan listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like admiration. "This is delicate," he said when I finished. "We can't make it look like you're announcing the acquisition to humiliate your husband. It has to be about the business, about you and Maya stepping into your power. The personal stuff, the marriage, the birthday dinner, that stays personal. I'm not trying to humiliate him. I said. I'm just done hiding. I know. But the press won't see it that way if we're not careful. They'll make it about revenge, about a bitter wife getting back at her husband. That's not the story we want. He pulled up a draft press release on his laptop. Ashfordshire Crisis Management acquired by Catalyst Ventures. 2 women built an 8-figure company while everyone was looking the other way. We lead with the business achievement, the innovation, the fact that you've been handling some of the biggest tech crises of the last 3 years and nobody knew your names. That's the story. When does it go live? I'm thinking Saturday night, 11 p.m., after your dinner. He glanced at me. That gives you your moment with Emmett and his friends. Then, while they're all processing what you told them, the press release hits. By morning, it's everywhere. Tech blogs, business news, LinkedIn. The story becomes about your success, not about your marriage. Can you coordinate with Forbes? TechCrunch? Already have. They're hungry for this story. Secret female founders who built something massive. That's catnip for business press right now. He closed his laptop. But Cora, I need you to understand something. Once you're visible, you can't go back to invisible. People will have opinions about you, about your business, about your marriage. They'll dissect your life on social media. Are you ready for that? I thought about the last 7 years, about introducing myself as Emmett's wife at parties and watching people's eyes glaze over with disinterest the moment they learned I just did some consulting. About being remarkable in secret because I was afraid of what visibility would cost. I'm ready, I said. On day 14, the morning of Emmett's birthday, I woke at 5 a.m. to an email from Maya with the subject line, "We did it. Wire transfer confirmed. OMG. We're rich. $12.7 million just hit your account. Check it. I'll wait." I pulled up my banking app with shaking hands. The number was there. Undeniable. 7 figures followed by more figures than I'd ever seen in my personal account. I waited for euphoria. For tears. For some big, cinematic moment of triumph. But instead I felt calm, like I'd been walking through fog for 7 years and someone had finally turned on the sun. The money wasn't the point. The point was I'd built something real while everyone was looking the other way. I'd proven to myself, if no one else, that remarkable wasn't something someone else got to decide about you. I got out of bed and walked to my closet. Pulled out the midnight blue silk dress I'd bought last week specifically for tonight. Simple cut, expensive fabric, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. I showered. Did my makeup. Styled my hair. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I'd barely recognize the woman looking back. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. So present. Done disappearing. My phone buzzed. Another text from Emmett. "See you tonight." I smiled at the screen and typed back 8 p.m. Don't be late. I arrived at Atelier Rousseau at 7:45, parking in the structure across the street. The evening air was cool, typical for San Francisco in late September, carrying that salt and fog smell from the bay. I walked the 2 blocks to the restaurant, my heels clicking against the pavement in a steady rhythm that felt like a countdown. The restaurant's exterior was understated, just a brass plaque beside a dark wooden door. The kind of place that didn't need to announce itself because everyone who mattered already knew where it was. I'd walked past it a dozen times with Emmett over the years, watching him slow down each time, his eyes lingering on the couples disappearing through that door into whatever magic waited inside. Someday, he'd say, "When I really make it, we'll go there." I'd made the reservation 4 months ago, back when I still thought we meant something. Colette was waiting inside, elegant in black, her French accent still thick despite what I knew was 20 years in San Francisco. She recognized me immediately. We'd spoken on the phone 3 times in the past week, finalizing details. "Miss Ashford," she said, extending her hand. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." "Thank you, Colette." She led me past the main dining room, past tables of well-dressed couples speaking in low voices over wine that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries. We went through a corridor lined with black and white photographs of Parisian food markets, then through a door into the semi-private dining room I'd reserved. It was perfect. The table was set for 12, champagne flutes catching the light from the Edison bulbs overhead. The menus were already placed. I'd pre-selected the chef's tasting menu, 7 courses, wine pairings with each. In the corner, discreet but visible, was the screen projector I'd requested, already connected to the restaurant's Wi-Fi network. The presentation equipment is ready, Colette said. You'll be able to connect directly from your laptop. And I briefed the sommelier. Champagne will be poured when you give the signal. I pulled out my laptop, tested the connection. The first slide appeared on the screen, a simple title slide with my company logo. I advanced through the presentation quickly, making sure everything was in order. The acquisition announcement, the financial documentation, the timeline of support, all of it clean. Professional, undeniable. Perfect, I said, disconnecting. I'll reconnect when I'm ready. Will you be joining the party immediately, or would you prefer to wait at the bar? The bar, I said. I want to watch them arrive. Colette led me back to the main room and settled me at the far end of the bar, positioned so I could see the entrance and the corridor leading to the private dining room. She placed a glass of sparkling water in front of me without asking. For clarity, she said quietly. I appreciated her understanding. I needed to be clear tonight, present for every moment of what was about to happen. The first guests arrived at 7:55. Marcus and Devin, Emmett's college roommates, both of them dressed in suits that screamed finance money. Marcus had put on weight since I'd last seen him at a barbecue 2 summers ago. Devin had shaved his head, probably trying to get ahead of the balding that was clearly winning. They looked around with confusion, checking their phones, comparing notes. Through the window, I watched them show each other their text messages, invitations I'd sent from an unknown number claiming to be from Emmett. Colette greeted them smoothly, confirmed they were here for the Ashford party, and led them to the private dining room. I watched their faces as they passed. Curiosity, uncertainty, the beginning of that social anxiety that comes from not knowing what role you're supposed to play. Harper arrived next at 7:57. Emmett's colleague from Morrison and Associates. I'd met her exactly 3 times in 7 years, twice at company holiday parties and once at a dinner celebrating Emmett's promotion. She was the kind of woman who dressed like she was perpetually on her way to an important meeting, sharp blazer, crisp blouse, heels that added 3 inches but somehow still looked practical. She greeted Marcus and Devin with the kind of professional warmth that didn't quite reach genuine friendship, and I realized she probably didn't know them well either. We were all supporting players in Emmett's life, kept carefully separated, so we never compared notes. At 8 o'clock exactly, Sienna walked in. I'd never met her in person, but I recognized her from the photos Emmett had shown me. Tall, blonde, the kind of pretty that looked expensive to maintain. She was wearing a dress that probably cost what most people spent on rent. Emerald green, fitted, the kind that demanded attention in any room. This was the woman who told Emmett I was unremarkable. The friend whose opinion had mattered more than 7 years of marriage. I watched her greet the others with easy confidence. Watched her laugh at something Marcus said. Watched her settle into the room like she belonged there, like this was her party, her celebration, her stage. Not for long. Colette offered champagne. Sienna accepted. The others followed suit. They clustered in the private dining room, visible through the glass partition. Their body language shifting from confusion to that forced social energy people adopt when they're not sure what's happening but don't want to seem uncool. I checked my phone. He'd text. Emmett was late. Then the door opened and there he was. He stood in the entrance for a moment, scanning the restaurant, and I watched the confusion bloom across his face when he spotted his friends through the glass. He pulled out his phone, checked it like he might have missed a message explaining what was happening. He was wearing the charcoal suit I'd bought him 18 months ago when he made senior design lead, the one I'd had tailored specifically to his measurements at a shop in North Beach that charged $200 just for the alterations. The Italian leather shoes I'd given him last Christmas, the ones he'd worn to every important meeting since then. He looked successful, polished, like a man who had his life figured out. I knew exactly how much of that image I'd funded. His eyes swept the room, searching, and finally landed on me at the bar. I watched him process it, his wife, alone, watching him, something unreadable in her expression. He started walking toward me, his face cycling through emotions. Confusion gave way to hope. Hope tinged with uncertainty. Uncertainty bleeding into the beginning of fear as he registered something in my posture that told him this wasn't going to be the reconciliation he'd convinced himself was coming. "Cora," he said when he reached me. "What's going on? Why are Marcus and Devin here? And Sienna? I thought. It's your birthday dinner," I said calmly. "I invited the people whose opinions matter most to you. But I thought," he said, "we should talk. I thought it would be just us. We will talk. In front of your friends. The ones who helped you see how unremarkable I am." I stood up, smoothed my dress. "Come on, everyone's waiting." I started walking toward the private dining room. Behind me, I heard Emmett following, his footsteps hesitant, his breathing slightly elevated. He was starting to understand that something was wrong, that the script he'd written in his head wasn't the one I was about to perform. Colette opened the door to the private dining room. The conversation inside stopped as everyone turned to look at us. I watched Sienna's expression shift from curiosity to something more guarded. Watched Marcus and Devin exchange a glance. Watched Harper set down her champagne glass with careful precision. "Thank you all for coming," I said, stepping into the room with the authority I usually reserved for boardrooms full of panicking executives. "Please, everyone sit. I wanted to celebrate Emmett's birthday with the people who matter most to him." Emmett entered behind me, still confused, looking between his friends and me like he was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. "Cora, what is this?" His voice carried an edge of desperation. "It's exactly what I said, your birthday dinner." I moved to the head of the table, positioning myself so everyone could see me clearly. "2 weeks ago, you told me your friends think I'm not remarkable enough for you. That you could do better. I thought your friends should be here when you find out exactly how remarkable I've been." I saw the moment it registered, the way his face went pale, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Sienna shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. Devin suddenly became very interested in the menu in front of him. Only Harper looked directly at me, her expression unreadable, like she was watching a play and wasn't sure yet whether it was tragedy or comedy. "Everyone here has champagne except you and me," I said, looking at Emmett. "Should we get glasses? We have so much to celebrate." Colette appeared silently at the door. 2 champagne flutes on a tray. She set them down at the remaining 2 seats, one at the head of the table where I stood, one beside it where Emmett was still frozen. "Please," I gestured to his chair. "Sit. This is your party, after all." He sat slowly, like a man walking into a trap he could see but couldn't avoid. The room was completely silent except for the soft sound of champagne being poured, bubbles rising in crystal, the anticipation thick enough to taste. I picked up my glass and smiled at the table full of people who decided I wasn't worth noticing. "Shall we begin?" The sommelier moved around the table with practiced efficiency, filling 12 champagne flutes with golden liquid that caught the light like promises about to be broken. I stood at the head of the table, perfectly still, watching bubbles rise in crystal, while Emmett remained frozen halfway between standing and sitting, his confusion hardening into something closer to dread. When the last glass was filled and the sommelier had retreated through the door with a discreet nod, I let the silence stretch. Let it become uncomfortable. Let everyone in that room marinate in their uncertainty for exactly 15 seconds before I spoke. 2 weeks ago, I began, my voice level and clear. Emmett came home and told me that his friends think I'm not remarkable enough for him, that he could do better. The words landed like grenades. Sienna's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. Marcus suddenly developed an intense interest in the napkin folded on his plate. Devin's jaw tightened. Harper, the only person in the room who looked genuinely surprised rather than guilty, turned to stare at Emmett with an expression I couldn't quite read. "And you know what?" I continued, keeping my tone conversational, almost light. "He was absolutely right." I saw the confusion ripple through the room. This wasn't the script anyone had expected. I'm not remarkable enough. I'm remarkable in ways he never bothered to notice. In ways none of you bothered to ask about. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the screen in the corner. The first slide appeared, clean, professional, undeniable. "This is my company, Ashfordshire Crisis Management." The logo filled the screen. Simple, elegant, professional. For 3 years, while Emmett was collecting his architecture awards and introducing me at parties as his wife who does some freelance consulting, my business partner Maya and I have been running a boutique crisis management firm specializing in tech companies. I advanced to the next slide. A list of services, carefully worded to protect client confidentiality, but specific enough to convey scope. We handle the disasters other consultants won't touch. Data breaches affecting millions of users. PR nightmares involving executive misconduct. Corporate scandals that could destroy companies if mishandled. We're discreet, we're effective, and we're very, very expensive. Next slide. Client testimonials with names redacted. Case studies with identifying details removed. Revenue charts showing exponential growth over 3 years. I heard someone inhale sharply. Couldn't tell who. Last year, we billed $4.2 million. This year, we're on track for $6.8 million. 6 months ago, 2 Fortune 500 companies approached us with acquisition offers. I let that information settle, watching faces process numbers that didn't match the narrative they'd constructed about who I was. "This morning," I said, advancing to the next slide, "we finalized the acquisition." The announcement from Catalyst Ventures filled the screen. Official letterhead, legal language, and at the bottom, the number that had made my accountant's hands shake when he'd shown me the wire transfer confirmation. 60% of the company sold to Catalyst Ventures for $21 million. My share, after splitting with my partner and paying out early investors, $12.7 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even breathing sounds. Just 12 people frozen in place, champagne glasses suspended, brains trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of them with the one they dismissed as unremarkable. I let them sit with it. Let the number echo in the quiet space. Then I advanced to the next slide. But let me show you something else. Because the remarkable thing isn't just what I built. It's what I built while everyone assumed I was building nothing. Bank statements appeared on the screen, my account and our joint account side by side, showing monthly transfers for the last 18 months. These are the deposits I made to cover our household expenses after Emmett's firm restructured and cut his salary by 30%. He was embarrassed about the pay cut, so I quietly transferred money from my business account to our joint account, enough to cover the shortfall so he wouldn't have to worry. Emmett made a sound, something between a gasp and a groan. I didn't look at him. Kept my eyes on the screen, on the evidence that couldn't be argued with. Next slide. Rent receipts from 5 and 6 years ago. These are from the 2 years after Emmett finished grad school. While he was interning at architecture firms that paid nothing but promised experience, I paid our rent, both of us, for 24 months. Next slide. A bank transfer for $15,000. This is the loan I gave Emmett for professional camera equipment, high-end gear for architectural photography to make his portfolio stand out. The loan agreement said he'd repay it when he got his first real paycheck. That was 4 years ago. We never discussed it again. I could feel Emmett staring at me, could sense the weight of his gaze, but I kept my focus forward. Next slide. An invoice from a web development company. $8,000 for a professional website redesign, his portfolio site, the one that helped him land his job at Morrison & Associates. Next slide. Another invoice, $3,000 for his membership in the American Institute of Architects, professional development courses, networking events, materials for presentations. Slide after slide, a paper trail of support that had been invisible because I'd never demanded recognition for it, never mentioned it, never held it over him. The receipts added up in real time on the screen. Dinners I'd paid for while he was networking. The car insurance I'd covered. The 1,000 small expenses that accumulate when you're building a life with someone. And one person is quietly carrying more weight than the other realizes. I never thought of this as keeping score, I said quietly. I thought of it as partnership, as love, as the invisible work that holds households together. I finally looked at Emmett. His face was gray, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he needed something solid to hold on to. But looking at these numbers now, I realized what I was actually doing. I was subsidizing your ego. Funding the fiction that you were the successful one, the breadwinner, the remarkable husband generous enough to marry someone ordinary. I turned to face the whole table. And all of you helped maintain that fiction. Because it was easier to assume I was unremarkable than to ask what I actually did. Easier to judge me for not having an impressive job title than to wonder if maybe I was building something you couldn't see. Sienna was crying silently, tears running down her face unchecked. Marcus had his head in his hands. Devin was staring at the table like he wanted it to swallow him. Harper was still looking at Emmett with that unreadable expression. Something between disappointment and disgust. The apartment we live in, I continued. The lease is in my name. Has been since before we married. Emmett moved in with me, not the other way around. The furniture, the art, the car he drives, I bought all of it. Not because I was keeping score, but because I had the money and he had student loans he was paying down. I disconnected my phone from the screen. The slides disappeared, leaving just a blank white rectangle that somehow felt louder than the images had been. I kept all of this quiet because I thought that's what a good wife did. I thought being remarkable meant being invisible. I thought love meant making myself smaller so my partner could feel bigger. I picked up my champagne glass. The weight of it felt significant. Ceremonial. I was wrong about all of that. And Emmett, you were wrong too. Not about me being unremarkable. You were wrong about what remarkable looks like. I raised the glass, watching the light catch in the liquid, creating tiny prisms that scattered across the white tablecloth. I paid for this dinner. Every course, every wine pairing, every moment of this evening. Consider it a birthday gift and a severance package. You all get to enjoy a $400 per person tasting menu courtesy of the unremarkable wife who apparently wasn't worth keeping. I looked at each of them in turn. Sienna with her tears, Marcus with his shame, Devin with his silence, Harper with her judgment, and finally Emmett, who looked like a man watching his entire self-concept collapse in real time. To finding better, I said, my voice steady, clear, final. May you all eventually learn the difference between what's remarkable and what's just visible. I drank. The champagne was excellent, crisp, expensive, everything this moment required. I sat down the glass with a soft clink that somehow sounded like an ending. Then I walked out of Atelier Rousseau into the cool San Francisco night, leaving behind the birthday dinner, the marriage, and the life I'd built around people who never bothered to look closely enough to see me. Behind me, through the glass, I heard the explosion of voices. Shock and anger and confusion all colliding at once. But I didn't look back. I'd said everything that needed saying. The rest was just noise. The walk to my car felt longer than it was. Every step away from Atelier Rousseau was a step into a version of my life I'd never imagined. Not divorced, not yet, but fundamentally changed in ways that couldn't be undone. I drove home on autopilot, barely registering the traffic lights or the streets I'd driven down 1,000 times. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. I felt calm in a way that should have been unsettling, but somehow wasn't. The apartment was dark when I let myself in. I didn't turn on the lights. Just walked to the windows overlooking the city and stood there watching San Francisco prepare for sleep. Lights dimming in office buildings. Last calls wrapping up in bars. The pulse of the city slowing to its nighttime rhythm. My phone was on silent, but I could see it lighting up on the counter. Text after text. I didn't read them. Instead, I sat down on the couch in the darkness and waited for what? I wasn't entirely sure. Grief, maybe? Regret, the emotional aftermath of detonating 7 years of marriage in front of an audience. But none of that came. Just that same clear, calm certainty that I'd done exactly what needed to be done. I must have dozed off at some point because I was startled awake by my phone ringing at 4:17 a.m. The screen showed an unknown number, San Francisco area code. I stared at it for 3 rings, debating whether to answer before curiosity won out. "Hello? Please," a woman's voice, wrecked with crying. "Please, Cora, something happened tonight and it's about you. Please answer. Please. I need to talk to you." I sat up straighter, trying to place the voice through the tears and gasping breaths. "I did answer," I said. "Who is this?" "It's Sienna. From the dinner. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Sienna. The friend who told Emmett I was boring, who'd started the conversation that led to him packing a suitcase and announcing he could do better. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, letting her cry while I drank it. "Sienna," I said finally, my voice calm and clinical, the tone I used with clients in crisis. "It's 4 a.m. What happened?" "After you left," she managed between sobs. Everything fell apart." Emmett tried to explain it away. "Tried to say you were exaggerating, that the company wasn't really yours, that you were just trying to make him look bad." I leaned against the counter, phone pressed to my ear, waiting. But Harper pulled out her phone. She found the press release. It went live at 11. "It's everywhere, Cora. TechCrunch, Forbes, LinkedIn. Crisis management firm Ashfordshire acquired for 8 figures. Your picture is right there with your partners. The whole story about building the company in secret." I pulled up my own phone with my free hand, scrolled through notifications I'd been ignoring. She was right. Jordan's press release had exploded across the tech news ecosystem. My face and Maya's were on the homepage of TechCrunch. Forbes had already posted an article with the headline, "The Invisible CEOs: How 2 women built an 8-figure company while no one was watching." We all just stared at him. Sienna continued, her voice breaking. "We sat there in that restaurant with your champagne and your expensive dinner, and we stared at the man who told us his wife was unremarkable, while the entire internet learned the truth." "And what did Emmett do?" I asked. "He tried to leave. Just stood up and tried to walk out. But Marcus stopped him. Said they weren't done talking. So we all followed him outside onto the sidewalk." I could picture it. The 5 of them standing on the street outside one of San Francisco's finest restaurants. Saturday night crowds walking past, having the kind of confrontation that draws stares. "We were angry," Sienna said. "All of us. Even Devin, who never gets angry about anything. We felt used. Like Emmett had been lying to us too, making you look small so he could look big." "What did you say to him?" "Marcus asked why you would hide success like that from your own husband unless you didn't trust him. Devin asked if Emmett had ever actually asked about your work, or just assumed he knew everything worth knowing about you." She paused, struggling to control her breathing. "And Emmett couldn't answer. He just stood there with his mouth opening and closing and he couldn't answer." I heard muffled sounds in the background, Sienna blowing her nose, trying to pull herself together. "Harper was the worst," she continued. "She just looked at him with this expression of complete disgust and said, 'You've been living off your wife's money while telling us she was nobody.' And that's when Emmett broke down." "Broke down how?" "Crying. Right there on the sidewalk. Started saying he didn't know, that you'd hidden it from him, that it wasn't fair for you to ambush him like that in front of everyone." Sienna's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But Marcus said something that shut him up completely." "What did Marcus say?" "He said, 'Did you ever ask? In 7 years of marriage, did you ever ask your wife what she was really working on, what she cared about, what she was building? Or did you just assume she was there to applaud you?'" The question hung between us through the phone line. The same question I'd been asking myself for weeks now. Had Emmett ever really asked? Had he ever looked at me and wondered if there might be more beneath the surface than what he could see? The answer was obvious and painful. No, he never had. He didn't have an answer to that either, Sienna said. Just stood there crying while people walked past, staring at us. Eventually, Harper called him a car, told him to go to Marcus's place, like he'd planned, and think about the kind of person he'd become. Is that why you're calling? I asked. To give me updates on Emmett's breakdown. No. I'm calling because… She broke off, crying harder. Because I need you to know we were wrong. So completely, devastatingly wrong about you, about what remarkable looks like, about everything. I waited for her to continue. I started that conversation, she said. At dinner 2 weeks ago. We'd all had too much wine, and we were talking about relationships and careers and life stuff. And I said, God, I said you were sweet but boring, and maybe Emmett should think bigger. Maybe he should be with someone more ambitious, more exciting, someone who matched his level of success. And everyone agreed. It wasn't a question. Yes. Everyone agreed. Because it was easy to look at you and make assumptions. Easy to see a quiet wife at work events and think she must not have anything interesting going on. Easy to never ask questions. Sienna, I said, my voice harder now. Why are you calling me at 4 a.m? Because Emmett is destroyed, and I don't know if he's crying because he hurt you or because everyone knows the truth now. And I need to know which one it is. I need to know if there's any part of him that actually feels bad for what he did to you, or if he's just embarrassed that everyone found out. I thought about that distinction. The difference between remorse and regret. Between feeling sorry for the harm you caused and feeling sorry for the consequences you're facing. Those are two very different things. I said. Yes. Sienna's voice was small. They are. And I don't think it's the first one. You're probably right. Is there any chance? She asked suddenly, desperately. Any chance you could forgive him? That you could try again? He's been texting all of us, saying he understands now, that he sees what he did, that he wants to make it right. I walked back to the window, looked out at the city, starting to wake up. Early morning joggers, delivery trucks. The sun just beginning to lighten the sky from black to deep blue. No, I said. There isn't a chance. But if he's really learned, if he's really changed, Sienna, he didn't change. He got caught. There's a difference. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. And even if he had changed, even if this somehow transformed him into a person capable of seeing me clearly, I don't want to be there for his transformation. I don't want to be the test case for his growth. So it's really over. It was over the moment he packed that suitcase. I said. Everything since then has just been epilogue. She was quiet for a long moment. Then what you did tonight, showing us all the truth like that. Was it revenge? I considered the question honestly. No, I said finally. It wasn't revenge. Revenge requires wanting someone to suffer. I didn't want that. I just wanted people to stop living in the comfortable fiction Emmett had built. I wanted the truth to be visible. Well, it is now, Sienna said softly. Very, very visible. Good. Cora. Her voice was tentative now, like she was afraid to ask, but needed to anyway. Do you hate us? For what we said, for how we talked about you? No, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of it. I don't hate you. I just don't think about you at all anymore. That seemed to land harder than hatred would have. I have to go, I said. It's late, or early, whatever this is. Hey, Cora. Thank you for answering. And I'm sorry for all of it. I know, I said. But Sienna, don't call me again. I hung up before she could respond. The sky was definitely lighter now. Morning coming, whether I was ready for it or not. I looked at my phone, at the 53 unread messages, at the notifications from news sites and LinkedIn and people I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reaching out to congratulate me. I turned the phone off completely. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. I woke up at 11:30 a.m. to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to cover, and the persistent buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was or why I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired. Then it all came back. The dinner, the presentation, walking out of Atelier Rousseau, Sienna's 4 a.m. phone call. I reached for my phone and immediately regretted it. 53 unread emails, 27 missed calls, text messages that had stopped loading because there were too many to display at once. I scrolled through the emails first, watching the subject lines blur past. Interview request Forbes. Podcast invitation, how I built this. TechCrunch wants to feature you. Entrepreneur Magazine, your story. Book deal interest, literary agent. Congratulations from former clients. Messages from investors I'd spoken to once at conferences years ago, suddenly remembering my name and asking about expansion opportunities. 3 separate podcast producers wanting me to tell the story of building a company in secret. And the headlines. Oh God, the headlines. I opened Safari and typed my name. The results filled the screen. Secret CEO's marriage ends after husband calls her unremarkable. The woman who built an 8-figure company while her husband thought she was nobody. From invisible to unstoppable, one woman's revenge on being underestimated. Tech executive exposes husband's belittling at his own birthday party. Some articles were sympathetic, framing me as a woman who'd finally stood up for herself. Others were critical, using words like calculating and vindictive and public humiliation. One opinion piece questioned whether someone who would weaponize a birthday dinner had the emotional stability to run a crisis management firm. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a take. My life had become a story people told to prove whatever point they wanted to make about marriage, success, gender dynamics, or revenge. I set the phone down and went to make coffee. The apartment felt different in daylight, empty somehow, even though nothing had physically changed. It was still my furniture, my art on the walls, my coffee maker on the counter, but it felt less like home and more like a stage set waiting for the next scene. I was halfway through my first cup when someone knocked on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw Maya, holding a paper bag and 2 to-go cups of coffee. I brought reinforcements, she said when I opened the door. Bagels from that place in the Mission you like, and better coffee than whatever you're drinking. She walked in without waiting for an invitation, set everything on the kitchen counter, and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than either of us typically tolerated. You did it, she said when she finally let go. You actually did it. Did what? Destroyed my marriage in front of an audience? Stopped hiding, she said, opening the bag, pulling out bagels and cream cheese. Stop making yourself small. Stop letting him take credit for the life you built. We settled on the couch with food and better coffee, and Maya filled me in on her morning. I've given 3 interviews already. Forbes, TechCrunch, and NPR's Marketplace. Turned down 5 others because I figured we should coordinate our messaging. She took a bite of her bagel. Jordan's been handling most of the press requests, but they specifically want both of us. The story of 2 women building something this big in secret. It's catnip for business media. Right now. How bad is it? I asked. The personal stuff? Maya pulled out her phone, scrolled through something. It's everywhere. The dinner, the presentation, the acquisition announcement. Someone at the restaurant must have talked because there are details about what you said, what you showed on the screen. Twitter's having a field day. Half the people are calling you a hero. The other half think you're a villain. She handed me her phone. I scrolled through the tweets. This is what we mean when we say women's work is invisible. She was literally funding his entire life, and he called her unremarkable. Imagine being so fragile you can't handle your wife being successful. Men are embarrassing. She humiliated him at his birthday dinner in front of all his friends. That's not empowerment. That's cruelty. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. He called her unremarkable. She showed receipts. Fair trade. I handed the phone back. I don't know if I can read any more of that. You shouldn't, Maya said. None of it matters. What matters is we have a company to run, and suddenly everyone knows who we are. She sat down her bagel. Do you regret it? The way you did it, going public at the dinner instead of just filing for divorce quietly? I thought about that. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. I don't regret telling the truth. I regret that it took him calling me unremarkable for me to realize I'd been making myself invisible, that I'd spent 7 years shrinking so he could expand. Maya nodded slowly. You know this changes everything, right? We can't go back to being anonymous. We're the face of Ashfordshire now. People are going to have opinions about us, about how we dress, what we say, who we date, what we believe. We're public figures now, whether we want to be or not. I know. Are you ready for that? I looked at my phone, at the 53 emails and 27 missed calls and the hundreds of social media notifications I hadn't even begun to process. I guess I have to be. Maya stayed for another hour, helping me draft responses to the most important interview requests, coordinating with Jordan on messaging strategy, making a list of decisions that needed to be made about the company's public presence now that we were no longer invisible. When she left, I finally opened my personal email and found what I'd been avoiding. 12 messages from Emmett, sent throughout the night and early morning. I read them in chronological order, watching the progression like a time-lapse of someone's self-concept collapsing. 11:47 p.m., what the hell was that? You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. How could you do this? 12:23 a.m., you planned this. You set me up. Made me look like a fool on purpose. 12:58 a.m., I know I said something hurtful, but you didn't have to destroy me publicly. That was cruel. 1:34 a.m., everyone's texting me. The press release is everywhere. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide it? 2:15 a.m., I don't understand. You never told me you had a company. You never said you were successful. How was I supposed to know? 2:47 a.m., I didn't know you were supporting us financially. You never mentioned the rent payments or the loans. Why didn't you tell me? 3 a.m., Marcus asked if I ever asked about your work. If I ever wondered what you were building. And I couldn't answer him. 3:33 a.m., I see it now. I see what I did. How I never asked. How I never looked. How I made you small because I needed to feel big. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. For what I did to you every day for 7 years. The last message was different from the others. Less defensive, more raw, like he'd finally stopped trying to manage the situation and started actually thinking about what he'd done. I read it twice, looking for manipulation, for the careful word choice of someone trying to produce a specific response. I found only exhaustion and something that might have been genuine understanding. I deleted all 12 messages anyway. My phone rang. Helen Voss, my lawyer. Good afternoon, she said when I answered, her voice carrying a warning note I recognized from our first meeting. I hope you've been resting after your eventful evening. Barely. What's wrong? Emmett retained counsel this morning. Richard Castellano, family law. He's expensive and aggressive, and he called me an hour ago asking about our intentions regarding separation. My stomach dropped. Already? He moves fast. That's part of why he's expensive. I heard papers rustling on her end. I told him you're prepared to file for dissolution, that you're seeking no community property claims given that the apartment and business assets are clearly separate property. But Cora, you need to prepare yourself for what's coming. What's coming? Richard is going to argue that Emmett deserves compensation for supporting your career during the early years of your marriage. He's going to paint a picture of a devoted husband who sacrificed his own advancement to support his wife's ambitions, who's now being discarded the moment she achieved success. I almost laughed. He supported my career? I paid our rent for 2 years while he was unemployed. I know. And we have documentation proving that. But Richard is very good at crafting narratives that judges find compelling. He'll argue that emotional support, networking assistance, household management, all of it constitutes a contribution to your success. I walked to the window, looked out at the city below. Ordinary Sunday afternoon. People living their ordinary lives. No idea that mine was becoming something unrecognizable. What do I need to do? Nothing yet. Just be aware that this isn't going to be quick or quiet. Richard will fight for a settlement. He'll probably leak things to the press to pressure you. He'll make this as public and painful as possible if he thinks it'll get you to pay out. Let him try, I said. I have 7 years of documentation, bank statements, loan agreements, receipts for every dollar I spent supporting Emmett's career while he was telling people I was unremarkable. If Richard wants to make this public, we'll make it very public. Helen was quiet for a moment. That's a dangerous game, Cora. Divorce proceedings that play out in the media rarely end well for anyone. Neither does staying invisible, I said. After we hung up, I sat on the couch with my cold coffee and thought about what came next. Legal battles, media scrutiny. Every detail of my marriage and my business dissected by strangers with opinions. My phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. CNN wants you for an interview tomorrow. Morning segment. Are you ready for television? I looked at my reflection in the darkened TV screen across the room. Messy hair, no makeup, wearing yesterday's clothes that I'd fallen asleep in. I didn't look ready for television. Didn't look ready for any of this. But ready or not, I was already in it. Yes, I typed back. Send me the details. Because if I was going to be visible, I might as well be impossible to miss. The CNN interview aired on a Tuesday morning. I watched it from the green room of a podcast studio in Oakland where I was scheduled to record next. My phone muted, coffee going cold in my hand. The host asked predictable questions about the acquisition, about building a company in secret, about what it felt like to finally step into the spotlight. I'd given careful answers, the ones Jordan and I had rehearsed. Professional, measured, focused on the business rather than the personal drama everyone actually wanted to hear about. But then she'd asked the question I hadn't prepared for. Do you think your husband ever loved you? I'd paused on screen, and I watched myself now in that pause, seeing something flicker across my face that I couldn't quite name. I think he loved the version of me that fit into his story, I'd said finally. The question is whether that counts as love at all. The clip went viral within hours. By afternoon, it had been turned into memes, quoted in think pieces, debated on Twitter by people who never met either of us but had strong opinions about what love should look like. That was 8 weeks ago. Now it was early December, and I was standing in the new offices Maya and I had leased in the financial district, 43rd floor, looking out at the bay through floor-to-ceiling windows that made the whole city look like something we owned. The space was everything we dreamed about during those late nights 3 years ago when we were still building in secret. Exposed brick walls, open floor plan with standing desks and collaborative spaces, a conference room with a view so stunning that clients sometimes lost their train of thought mid-sentence, distracted by the bridge and the water and the sense that they were making decisions at the top of the world. We had 40 employees now, actual staff with business cards and email signatures and 401k plans, clients in 6 countries, revenue projections that made the $21 million acquisition price look quaint. Maya found me at the window, 2 coffees in hand. She passed me one without speaking, and we stood there together, watching the city move below us. Forbes' article is live, she said finally. I pulled out my phone. There it was. The invisible powerhouses. How Cora Ashford built an 8-figure company while her husband thought she was unremarkable. The headline made me wince. I'd asked them to focus on the business, on the work Maya and I had done, on the innovative approach we take to crisis management. But editors loved a personal angle, and my personal angle had become the story everyone wanted to tell. It's good, Maya said. Really good. They focused on the company, on our client success stories, on the methodology we developed. The personal stuff is just context. I scrolled through the article. She was right. It was well written, fair, comprehensive. But the pull quotes they'd chosen were all about marriage and invisibility, and what happens when someone finally refuses to stay small. The comments are brutal, I said, scrolling further. Don't read the comments. Never read the comments. But I couldn't help myself. The opinions ranged from supportive to savage. Everyone projecting their own experiences and grievances onto my story. She's a hero for exposing him. She's vindictive for humiliating him publicly. This is what feminism looks like. This is what narcissism looks like. I locked my phone and put it in my pocket. How are you doing? Maya asked. Really doing? I don't know, I said honestly. Some days I feel clear and strong and certain I did the right thing. Other days I wonder if I could have handled it differently, been less public, less dramatic. You weren't dramatic. You were honest. There's a difference. Tell that to the internet. Maya turned to face me fully. Cora, you spent 7 years making yourself invisible so your husband could feel impressive. You built a multi-million-dollar company while he was telling people you did some freelance work. When you finally told the truth about who you were and what you built, people called it revenge. But it wasn't revenge. It was just refusing to participate in his fiction anymore. I knew she was right. Knew it intellectually. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. My phone buzzed. An email from an address I didn't recognize, but a name I did. Emmett. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Cora. I've had time to think. To really think about what I did, what I said, who I was. You asked me once what I thought about you, really thought, and I said my friends might have a point about you not being impressive enough. I've realized now that the only unimpressive thing in our marriage was my inability to see what was right in front of me. You were building an empire while I was building my ego. You were creating something meaningful while I was creating an image. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And you're the most remarkable person I've ever known. I'm sorry it took losing you to figure that out. I read it twice, searching for traces of the feeling I'd had 9 years ago when I met him in that coffee shop in Portland. The excitement, the hope, the belief that we were building something real together. Found nothing but a quiet recognition that some lessons come too late. I deleted the email and put my phone away. He reached out again. Maya asked. Last time? I'm blocking the address. Good. We stood at the window for a few more minutes watching the city before Maya had to leave for a client meeting. I stayed behind, looking out at the bay, at the bridges connecting San Francisco to the rest of the world, at the boats cutting white lines through gray water. A month later, I gave my first keynote speech. The tech conference in Austin had 2,000 people in attendance, most of them younger than me, hungrier than me, trying to build the kinds of companies Maya and I had already sold. I stood backstage in the wings, listening to my introduction, feeling the particular terror that comes from knowing you're about to walk onto a stage under lights bright enough to blind you. Please welcome Cora Ashford, CEO of Ashfordshire Crisis Management. The applause started, and I walked out into the light. I talked for 30 minutes about invisibility as a strategy, about building in the shadows until what you've created becomes undeniable. I talked about the cost of making yourself small, about the years I'd spent diminishing my own accomplishments because I thought that's what partnership required. And I talked about the moment I decided to stop. Not because I wanted revenge, though that's how everyone framed it, but because I finally understood that remarkable wasn't something someone else got to decide about you. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People stood, some were crying. Afterward, in the green room, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, eyes bright with that particular hunger that comes from wanting to prove yourself worthy of the space you occupy. My boyfriend told me I should focus on supporting his startup instead of building my own, she said. He said 2 entrepreneurs in a relationship would be too competitive. That someone needed to be the support system. What did you say? I asked. Nothing yet. But after hearing your talk, I'm going home and breaking up with him. I smiled. Good. Is that what you would do? In my position. I thought about that. About 7 years of supporting Emmett's career while quietly building my own. About the price of invisibility and the cost of visibility. About the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. I'd ask yourself one question, I said. Does he make you feel bigger or smaller? Does being with him expand your sense of what's possible, or contract it? If the answer is contract, you already know what to do. She nodded, thanked me, and walked away with the kind of determined stride that suggested she'd already made her decision. On a Friday evening in mid-December, 3 months after the dinner that changed everything, I stood in my apartment, paid for with money I'd earned, filled with furniture I'd chosen, and looked out at San Francisco glittering in the winter dusk. My phone buzzed. Maya asking if I wanted to grab dinner at a place in the Mission. I typed back, "See you in 30. I thought about Emmett sometimes. Wondered if he'd learned the lesson, or just learned to hide his assumptions better with the next person. Wondered if he told his version of our story at dinner parties, casting himself as the victim of a vindictive woman who'd hidden her success to make him look bad. I thought about Sienna and Marcus and Devin and Harper, whether they'd changed how they measured people, or just gotten more careful about saying their judgments out loud. But mostly, I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who made herself small, who built empires in secret, who believed love meant disappearing until there was nothing left of yourself but the reflection in someone else's eyes. And I thought about the woman I'd become, visible, valued, finally taking up the space I'd earned. Emmett had called me unremarkable, and in doing so, he'd given me permission to stop performing. Stop shrinking. Stop asking for permission to be exactly as extraordinary as I'd always been. I grabbed my coat and keys, locked the door behind me, and headed out into the December evening. The city was alive with lights and movement and possibility. And I was finally, undeniably, unforgettably visible. That quiet revolution from invisible to unforgettable turned out to be the most remarkable thing of all. If this story of reclaiming your power had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Cora revealed those bank statements at the birthday dinner, showing who really funded everything. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe for more.